Hello, everyone. My name is Henn Ojaveer. I'm a professor at the Pärnu College, University of Tartu, on marine ecosystems. And my talk today for you will be about the Baltic Sea. It will be a fairly short and brief excursion to explain the whole ecology and the issues associated to that. In the Baltic Sea, you would need several days, if not weeks. But I hope that half an hour will do that. You will get a bit better imagination about the Baltic Sea compared to what you had half an hour ago, after half an hour. So this is the map of the Baltic Sea, geographical map, and some basic facts. As you can see, the Baltic Sea is quite elongated from north to south and from the east to west. There are several sub-basins in it, and very narrow and shallow strait connecting with the North Sea at the left-hand side, in here around Copenhagen. And it's relatively small sea. It's semi-enclosed, meaning that, as said earlier, only a very shallow and narrow strait connecting to the ocean. It's epicontinental, meaning that it's situated on the continent. Compared to oceans, or Pacific or Atlantic Ocean or Mediterranean Sea, they are situated between the continents, while the Baltic Sea is on the continent, and this is why it's very shallow. The maximum depth is a bit less than 500 meters. It's brackish. It's brackish means that it's neither freshwater nor fully marine. Fully marine is above 30 per mil, and fully freshwater is 0 per mil. Baltic Sea salinity varies from around, let's say 20, around Copenhagen, and in the west, almost close to 1 to 2 per mil in Gulf of Bothnia or Gulf of Finland in the northeast. And because it's brackish, it's a very species poor system, meaning that there are only a very few species which actually tolerate this. Fully non-marine and fully non-fresh conditions. So this is another geographical map, and the main message from here is that there are several so-called assessment units or environmental condition evaluation units in the Baltic Sea. There are more than 10 of them, and all the environmental assessments are performed by those sub areas. Some of them I'm just listing from the map here: Botnian Bay, Botnian Sea, Gulf of Finland, Bornholm Basin, Kattegat, and so forth. This is a very brief history now, slide indicating that different Baltic Sea has been in different configuration and shape and environmental conditions in previous times. It started, the formation of the Baltic Sea started about 12,000 years ago. No, 14,000 years ago, actually. Where ice started to melt on the Scandinavian ice cap, and the first, let's say, the first Baltic Sea, called Baltic Ice Lake, was very cold and totally fresh. And some of the animals actually from that time are also living in the Baltic Sea nowadays, including I'm just giving you now the one name. It's a ringed seal. I'll show you it later on as well. So ringed seal is a classical so-called ice age relict species in the Baltic Sea, which has been here for several thousands of years. Then the second major phase of the historical development of the Baltic Sea is so-called Yoldia Sea, around 11,000 years before Christ. And as you can see beneath the ice cap, there is a direct connection to the sea. This is nowadays Swedish territory, and this means that it was still cold because the ice cap was here, but also due to the connection to the sea, there are saline conditions. And as you can see, some areas of the contemporary Baltic Sea are still under ice. So the third main stage is Ansulus Lake, about 10,000 years before Christ, and the formerly existing connection to the sea is now vanished, and it is cold, relatively cold, but warmer than previously, and fully freshwater conditions. And then the fourth major historical developmental stage is Litorina Sea. It's warm, it's saline, and it's more or less the shape of the contemporary Baltic Sea. As you can see, that the most northerly areas are now opened, and the ice is gone here, and it has a connection to the North Sea. So indicating you that the Baltic Sea, what we have nowadays, has been totally different in different time periods historically. By no means it is surprise for you that it gets warmer. It gets warmer almost everywhere. I don't know why the Arctic here is cold, but actually the most recent evidence about the Arctic is saying that Arctic is probably warming with a most rapid speed. But the Baltic Sea, as you can see, is also getting warmer over time. This is the sea surface temperature change per decade during past 40 years or so. This is taken from the very recent publication, so indicates that there are only a very few areas globally which are actually getting warmer more rapidly than the Baltic Sea. It's a Ponto-Caspian region here. Some of the information what the Baltic Sea scientists have originate from past centuries, and one of those is extremely important time series or about the saline water inflows to the Baltic Sea. As Baltic Sea is semi-enclosed, from the first slide you saw this. It's very important that the saline water is, or the water exchange between the North Sea and the Baltic Sea is continuously ongoing, ensuring that there are no oxygen problems in the Baltic Sea, and the salinity is high. From the figure here on this slide, you can see that saline water inflows to the Baltic Sea were fairly frequent until early 1980s. So basically until 40 years ago. This actually means that several active Baltic scientists have never studied the sea, which has had a high salinity. And since early 1980s, the frequency of saline water inflows to the Baltic has been much lower than previously, and also there has been only a very few strong inflows. One in 90s, and one early 2000s, and one a few years ago. So basically one per decade, which is very rare event. And this means that under the increasing global warming and there are more river inflows of the Baltic Sea. The Baltic Sea gets less saline and less saline over time. Another important, and I think this is a last climate slide. Sea ice is declining. The colder is a winter, the more sea we have, the more ice we have at sea, and the more thicker the ice is. But as you can see, there is a general trend during recent decades, very sharp decline, but also during the past century from 800s until 920. So this declining ice is not a new phenomenon in the Baltic Sea, but the strength of the decline has never been occurred before in the history of the Baltic Sea. So it gets warmer, it gets less saline, and also the ice coverage is decreasing. And this is important for, again, coming back to the one of the main or interesting and charismatic glacial relic species, gray seal. Gray seal requires sea ice for reproducing, and if there is no sea ice, there are no pups, gray seal pups, and meaning that the population has still problems in terms of abundance. Explicitly tied to the salinity conditions, different species have different distribution ranges. If we look at the oceans and fully marine conditions, animals, what we have on the left-hand side panel, on the left-hand side, sea stars and crabs are common constituents of marine biota. In the Baltic Sea, they are only part and present in the very restricted area, only the westernmost parts, due to the salinity. And there are also, I mean, several other species indicated on the screen here, for instance, which has salinity tolerance limit in terms of the spatial distribution. For instance, cod is can be theoretically found also in some northernmost areas, but in reality, cod population is so bad condition that they cod only occurs in southern Baltic Sea. And probably as a surprise for you, and also, but not so much for the ecologist, herring, which is fully and true marine species. It can basically reproduce in the totally freshwater conditions, so has been well adapted to the Baltic Sea brackish conditions, and actually is present everywhere. Number of species is also tied to the salinity conditions, and as you can see, the species diversity is fairly high in the westernmost part, over 1,000 species in some areas, and much less in the middle of the Baltic Sea, while a bit increasing in some parts in the north and northeast, because of those areas are very fresh, and some freshwater species are coming in essentially in here, in Neva estuary and then the eastern part of the Gulf of Finland. So the increase in species diversity in some northerly and easterly areas of the Baltic Sea is not due to increase of marine species, but increase of the number of freshwater species in those areas. A few words also on the Baltic Sea food web. While the most of the dynamics in the biota in organisms in the Baltic Sea is influenced by abiotic conditions, climate related factors, and also salinity. There are also important food web connections. And in here you can see who eats whom and how these locates in the in the coastal slope. So there are some very important life and interactions are going on near the coast, at the coastal slope, where there is a still photic zone. In the photic zone means that the light is penetrating down to those areas here, and there is lots of benthic large algae, mussels, and also coastal fish communities like perch and pipe perch and are very, very active here. And also birds, marine birds are eating eating some of the constituents of these coastal very abundant communities and diverse communities. In the open sea, the species composition and life is much less diverse. Pelagic fish, some sprat, herring, some mammals, seals, and cod, and this is basically it. And then humans catching fish and yeah, in terms of food web, important is that removals of commercial fish. And the life at the bottom, where there is no illumination, where there is no light, it's much more species poor than in near coastal areas. Absolutely the biggest problem, human-induced problem and the environmental problem of the Baltic Sea is eutrophication. And eutrophication is a process by which a body of water becomes enriched in dissolved nutrients. It's phosphorus and nitrogen. Phosphorus is mostly coming from households, from cities. Nitrogen is mostly coming from farms, from manure. And those stimulate the growth of aquatic plant, which usually results in depletion of dissolved oxygen. And like humans need oxygen for their lives, also marine organisms need oxygen for their lives. And this is the integrated status of eutrophication, the most recent one of the Baltic Sea, and indicating that most areas actually are at the lower end of the eutrophication status rank or grade, meaning that there are really troubles in terms of eutrophication. So this is one of the outcome, one of the ecological outcome or environmental outcome of the eutrophication. In areas in red, you can see that those areas are suffer from oxygen condition. Oxygen is depleted in those areas, there are both in coastal areas and also in open sea areas. And you can see that about a century ago, the hypoxic areas, meaning that there was no oxygen, are those black areas. So I would say less than 5% actually from there nowadays. And situation, and this is mostly, not only, but mostly due to the human activities, human influence, basically releasing nitrogen and phosphorus to the sea. Some pictures on cyanobacteria plumes. Cyanobacteria plumes or blue-green algae are explicit outcome of increased and excessive eutrophication. And this is natural phenomenon of semi-enclosed temperate seas. So I would argue that something is very wrong if there are no blue-green blooms or cyanobacteria blooms in the Baltic Sea. The only question is the magnitude and the amount, the spatial scope of those blooms and the amount of the algae. And in the right bottom, you can see some of the decaying blooms. So this is, I mean, quite nasty to look at, and no one is invited to actually to go swim in those conditions. In addition, that those cyanobacteria can be potentially toxic, they might also, those decaying communities can cause you irritation on your skin and some further health problems. But again, the occurrence and cyanobacteria blooms is natural and logic phenomenon of the Baltic Sea, but it has reached quite high level of blooms because of human activities resulting from the nitrogen and phosphorus release in earlier decades. Sorry. Directly, the eutrophication is directly affecting the biodiversity status of the Baltic Sea. On the left-hand side, we can see the status of the benthic habitat. So benthic is everything what is at the bottom, and the right-hand side is pelagic habitat. Pelagic is everything what is in the water column. So some northerly areas have a bit better condition in terms of biodiversity than southerly areas. But in generically, again, the overall picture is that the biodiversity status of the Baltic Sea is not good. And this is mostly due to the eutrophication signals. Funny picture. Some of the historical evidences on more than a century ago from the Baltic Sea area. Some of them actually from here, from Pärnu, Estonia, indicating that how the coastal life looked like century ago. And all handmade, almost no technology, mostly fished with the nets, sorting fish on boat, no automatic sorting machines. And this is how the picture looks like today. Huge machinery. In combination with increasing fishing pressure, what you can understand from this picture, and more advanced fish shoals detecting devices, and the climate change and the eutrophication. Some fish species have huge problems in the Baltic Sea. One of them is cod. Cod is currently very low stock level due to the ecosystems changes, but also heavy exploitation. Cod catches, we have a fairly good data about the landing statistics going back to the 1950s. So the yellow line is cod. So cod has basically disappeared during past decades. The catches are very low because there is not much cod in the Baltic Sea left. While two pelagic species, herring and sprat, they are absolutely dominating in catches. They have been very high levels also previously, but are both at the very high level now. By the way, sprat has been quite low earlier times when cod was very abundant because cod eats sprat. The main prey for adult and also late juvenile cod is actually sprat. And the fourth important species in the Baltic Sea is flounder, and those are actually the main commercial fish species. Maybe salmon as well, but salmon life history is a bit different. Salmon spends part of the time in rivers. On the figure right bottom, you can see the total amounts of fish catches from the Baltic Sea. They amounted over 1 million tons in 90s, but have basically decreased sharply since then. So over 1 million tons catch is about the same, like, for instance, Icelandic annual catch nowadays. Marine mammals. So here is the famous ringed seal I have mentioned you earlier twice. Nice animal, a small animal, and it's still threatened. The population is still around 4,000 individuals per Baltic Sea. This is very low. compared to gray seals, which many heads here, which were also historically in after quite abundant times about a century ago, faced also huge huge drop, but they have recovered now, and I think they are about 10 times more abundant than the ringed seal, about 40,000 individuals. So they are currently abundant and have recovered from the deep decline, and it was mainly pollution and also hunting have caused the decline. Basically hunting in the beginning, and then pollution in 50s and 60s gave the last shot to basically to the level where those both species suffered in terms of reproduction. But now the picture is better, but not for all species. Non-indigenous species, this is one of my favorite topics, so we can talk about hours here, but I only added here 2 slides. This is a cumulative number of species, non-native species. Non-native species are those species which are brought into the Baltic Sea or new areas by humans only, meaning, I mean, shipping, meaning establishing canals, meaning aquaculture activities, and so forth. So by human aid. And there is, if you would like to get more information, there is a free access database called Aquanis, where all the information is up to date. The information is updated there or renewed annual basis by all Baltic countries. So more information can found there. And here are some worst animals which don't look like very awful when you look at on screen, but some of them, essentially the round cobby, which is in the center, has caused major troubles in the Baltic, both for humans in terms of fish catches. It's dominating there. It's a low value species. Also, some migrating birds have changed their behavior because round cobby eats all mussels. The same appears for flounder, that the diet of round cobby and flounder overlap, and flounder has vanished from some areas. And some other nice animals as well. Zebra mussel, very abundant in Great Lakes. Absolute disasters there in the Baltic Sea, relatively low abundance, but were present, I mean, major changes. And some nice crabs, I mean, Harry's mud crab and Chinese meeting crab. There are almost no native crabs in the Baltic, so those crabs basically enrich the Baltic Sea in terms of trophic functions. So a few words on marine protected areas, because humans are affecting Baltic Sea and also oceans globally quite heavily. You would also need to talk about protection and habitat protection and species protection. So currently there are over 10% of the Baltic Sea protected, and the most recent biodiversity strategy of the European Union actually says that by 2030 or 2050, I don't know, 2030 maybe 2050, 30% of sea should be under protection. So those, I mean, activities are heavily ongoing. There are some marine protected areas established by the Regional Marine Management Commission called HELCOM, Helsinki Commission, and there are also some Natura 2000 areas. Those are centrally established by the European Commission. So human impact is increasing to the sea. This is a mixture now here of different human activities and pressures. Climate change, by the way, the most recent report on the International Panel for Climate Change is actually saying that most of the climate warming has now been proven to be caused by humans. So it's a climate change, fishery eutrophication, pollution, gravel extraction, littering. Littering means all these plastic waste which is thrown to the sea, non-native species, cost fishing gear. This is a fishing gear which has, for whatever reason, left in the sea and still active and catches some fish and birds and mammals, underwater noise, wind parks, cables, and so forth. So this is all the array of activities and pressures which affects the sea, and we would need to protect it. And the protected areas is one way. Another way is ecosystem restoration. So we are now already talking about restoring the degraded habitats and ecosystems, and not only protecting them. So there was a recently completed a big project, the first one on marine realm, financed by the EU Horizon 2020 framework, marine ecosystem restoration in changing European seas. It involved Mediterranean, North Sea, and the Baltic Sea, and University of Tartu from Estonia was also partnering here. So you can get, if interested, more information here. There are some plans on large-scale oxygenation of anoxic bottoms, but so this is basically changing the condition at the sea, and you need to be very careful and start doing this, because you probably don't need where you finally end up by the end of the day. But there are some initiatives and no actions as yet. While there are already relatively advanced actions or river restoration of in the Baltic Sea, as said earlier, there is a salmon in the Baltic Sea, which is important. There are several salmon, salmon and sea trout, which inhabit the rivers as well, and they actually reproduce there. So healthy conditions of Baltic rivers is important for increasing salmon and restoring some salmon populations, and there are already some nice success stories. So in case you're interested, please visit the HELCOM website. And I think that's it. I think it was almost precisely 30 minutes. So I thank you for your attention.